My name is Priya Vance, and for 4 years I ran a coffee counter on the amber concourse of Halyard Way Station, second ring, between a Tevi noodle stall and a parts kiosk that never once had the part you needed. I made coffee the old way, ground beans, real water, no synth. Half the station thought that was quaint. The other half lined up for it every third shift. Tansy lay under the counter on a folded blanket that used to be my jacket. Border collie, black and white, one ear up and one ear down, the kind of dog bred for 100 generations to watch a field full of sheep and decide, calmly, what needed to happen next. She didn't bark at customers. She didn't beg. She watched the line the way she used to watch a flock, patient, unbothered, missing nothing. Most of the concourse regulars had stopped noticing her. That was the whole point of her. A dog lying quiet under a counter is furniture. Nobody plans around furniture. I'd had her since basic, back on Earth, back when I still thought I'd wear a uniform for a living instead of an apron. She washed out of the program with me, more or less. A training injury, a knee that never came back all the way, a discharge with my name misspelled on it. I took the severance and a one-way berth out to the trade lanes, and she came along because nobody in the office had the paperwork to stop her, and because I hadn't asked. She'd slept through 2 hull inspections, one pirate scare that turned out to be a scheduling error, and roughly 4,000 mornings of me grinding beans before the concourse lights came up to third shift brightness. She'd never once, in 4 years, raised her voice at anybody. I used to think that was just her temperament. I know better now. Halyard itself was nothing special, as way stations go. 3 rings, a customs deck, a market strip that changed hands every few years, depending on which trade combine was winning that decade's tariff war. The amber concourse ran the length of the second ring, food stalls and repair kiosks, and a chapel 2 species shared, without ever quite agreeing on the schedule. It smelled, most hours, of frying dough and machine coolant, and the particular ozone tang you get from a life support system running a few % over capacity. I liked it. It had never asked me to be anything other than the woman who made good coffee and didn't cause trouble. The Scarn Glide Corp started showing up on Halyard about 6 weeks before any of this happened. Young Scarn, mostly, riding grav skates that hissed a half-inch off the deck plating, jackets scored with rank chevrons they'd awarded themselves. They didn't work for station security, and they didn't work for the trade authority. They worked for a percentage, paid weekly, by anyone who wanted their stall glass unbroken. Halyard's actual authority was 3 systems away and understaffed. The Glide Corps had noticed. I hadn't paid anybody a percentage. I'd told the first one who asked, politely, that I didn't have it to give, and he'd skated off looking amused, like I'd told a joke he intended to remember. 2 stalls down, the parts kiosk owner had paid, quietly, and told me not to make a thing of it. Reska, 3 stalls the other way, had paid too, and called it a maintenance fee for a machine he didn't own. Halyard's security detail ran 4 officers for the whole ring, and none of them wanted to be the one who made the Glide Corps a problem instead of a nuisance. Easier, for most people, to pay the toll and keep their glass. I wasn't most people, not out of courage particularly. I just didn't have it. A coffee counter runs on thin margins, and I'd already priced myself as close to the bone as I could go. The morning it came to a head, there were 5 of them. Their leader went by Doss, tall even for a Scarn, plates along his jaw scarred pale where he'd had them reset more than once. He rolled up slow, the way they all did, letting the hiss of the skates announce him before he spoke. Vance, he said my name like he was doing me the favor of remembering it. 6 weeks, no contribution. You understand what a contribution buys you. I understand what it costs me, I said. I'm not carrying it. He looked past me at the counter, then down, and found Tansy, ears half-cocked, watching him without lifting her head off her paws. That's the deposit against your stall then. He nodded at her, like he'd just solved a math problem. Market vermin. I'll have someone haul it off tonight. Save you the trouble of feeding it. 2 of the others laughed. That thin, performative laugh young toughs do when the joke's not funny, but the audience is watching. I didn't laugh. I didn't argue either. Arguing was a contribution too, just one you paid in time instead of currency, and I'd learned that early. She's not for sale, and she's not going anywhere, I said, and went back to steaming milk for the Tevi engineer, 3 places back in line, because the line doesn't stop moving just because somebody's decided to be a problem. Doss didn't like that. I found out exactly how much he didn't like it when he reached across the counter. Not fast, unhurried, the way a man reaches for something he's already decided belongs to him, and closed his hand around my wrist to pull me forward across the steel. I never saw Tansy get up. 1 second she was a shape under the counter. The next, she was between us, not touching either of us, 4 feet planted, weight low and even, and she was looking at Doss the way she used to look at a ram that had decided to test the fence. Not a warning stare, not a threatening one, a settled one, the look of something that has already worked out every version of what happens next, and isn't in a hurry about any of them. She didn't growl. She didn't bare a tooth. She just stood there, dead still, ears forward, eyes locked on his, and waited. Doss let go of my wrist. Not flinched. Let go. The way you set down something you've just noticed is heavier than it looked. His skates hissed once as he shifted his weight back half a step. I found out afterward, from Reska, the old Tevi engineer who'd been 3 places back in that line, and had apparently spent 40 years running cargo through 6 systems with a Skarn crew before he retired to Halyard, what Doss had actually seen. Skarn pack order runs on stillness, Reska told me the next morning, stirring his coffee slower than the coffee needed. Young ones snarl and posture. That's rank theater. It means nothing. Everyone in the pack knows it means nothing. The one who doesn't move, doesn't blink, doesn't posture, doesn't back down, and doesn't come forward either, that one has already won every fight it's ever needed to have. That's an alpha's stillness. They're taught to recognize it before they're taught to walk straight. Your dog held that stare for 11 seconds. Doss has held a blade to another Skarn's throat for less than 11 seconds, and called it a victory. She was protecting the counter, I said. That's all that was. That may be all it was to her, Reska said. It was not all it was to him. Doss backed his skates a full length off the deck plating before he spoke again, and when he did, his voice had lost the amusement. Keep the dog inside, he said. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was closer to a request. She stays where she stays, I said. He looked at Tansy one more time. She hadn't moved, hadn't broken the stare, hadn't so much as shifted her weight off her front paws. He nodded once, the way you nod at a superior officer whose rank you'd just been reminded of, and rolled backward, slow, until the hiss of his skates and the others faded down the concourse toward the lift bank. They didn't come back that week, or the one after. I heard later, second-hand, filtered through Reska and the parts kiosk owner and a Tevi cook 2 stalls down. That word had gone through the Glide Corp's roster fast. There's a dog on the amber concourse you do not test. She isn't guarding a counter. She's holding rank. And Doss himself had told the newer skaters to route around that whole stretch of the concourse, rather than find out twice. None of it changed my coffee. None of it changed my line. Tevi engineer still wanted his cup black with 2 sugars. The parts kiosk owner still wanted his with cream. And Tansy went back to her blanket under the counter, the second the last hiss of grav skates cleared the corridor, chin back down on her paws, one ear up, one ear down, watching the flow of the concourse the way she'd always watched it, like a field that mostly took care of itself, and needed her only for the parts that didn't. I gave her the last of the cream that evening, in the little steel bowl I kept behind the register. She took it slow, unbothered, the way she took everything, and went back to sleep before I'd finished wiping down the counter. Reska raised his cup to her on his way out. 11 seconds, he said again, shaking his head like the number still didn't sit right with him. I've seen men train their whole lives and never learn to hold a room that quiet. I told him she wasn't trying to hold the room. She was just watching her flock. He said that was, in his experience, exactly what an apex looked like when it wasn't trying.